to the Venezuela panel. Where we made it. I'm William Bloom. I'm the moderator. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Back in 2004, in 2002, in April, when there was this coup against Chavez, I wrote in my blog, how do we know that the United States was behind this coup? I said, we know, for the same reason that we know that the sun will rise tomorrow. Because that's always the way it's been, and why should tomorrow be different? And in Latin America, anyone who stands up to Washington, even in a halfway serious manner, is going to be targeted for overthrow. And with Chavez, it's been much more than halfway. He's been a very serious opponent. So there was no question then. And all we found out afterwards has confirmed that. The U.S. government, for example, met with all the conspirators, either in Washington or Venezuela beforehand. Well, I'll speak a bit more after our speakers are finished. The first speaker is Clark Webb. Clark was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. He has worked with a number of community groups in the areas of home repair for the poor and food banks. In 1987, Clark went on his first trip to Nicaragua with a Witness for Peace at the height of the war being waged by the U.S. against the Sandinista revolution, a war one could say which is still being waged, given that Daniel Ortega is now the president. Currently, Clark is the Virginia State Coordinator for Witness for Peace. In that position, he has given testimony to members of the U.S. Congress, organized speakers tours and press conferences for labor leaders and human rights workers. He has traveled extensively throughout Latin America, most recently in the past 2 years to Colombia and Venezuela. So I give you Clark Webb.
Thanks for your kind words. Just to let you know how this is going to go, our presentation is a prelude to Natalie. We're very happy to have Natalie here, and I'm so glad you could speak to us. I'll give a brief chronology of the last 20 years of Venezuelan history, so you get an idea of the preceding events that have set up the current circumstances. Perhaps the turning point in Venezuelan history, at least as far as the last 20 years are concerned, in 1989 there was a tremendous outburst, a tremendous riot that happened nationwide in Venezuela. It's become to be known as the Caracazo. Caracazo was a response to then the neoliberal policies of the current president at the time, Andres Perez. The IMF and the World Bank dictated policies that overnight changed the cost of everything in Venezuela. Everything went up 50 to 100%, just overnight. And there was no widespread knowledge among the population that this was to occur. From one day to the next, the bus prices to get to work doubled, food costs doubled, everything doubled. And the shock of what was done in this supposed democracy was so overwhelming that the people went out to the streets and they rioted from the length and the breadth of the country. Of course, the military was called out. The official death total for this rioting was 300, but more accurate appraisals of people who were on the scene said there were thousands and thousands of bodies, dead bodies, and I've seen estimates from 3,000, which is the low number in the alternative report, up to 10,000 that were killed in these riots. Hugo Chavez, being in the military at the time as a military officer, he said what the slaughter that he saw in the streets of his country, it sickened him. And this is when Hugo Chavez and his coterie of friends in the military decided they must do something, that this should never happen again. So in 1992, then Lieutenant Colonel Hugo Chavez led a military coup to overthrow the Andres Perez presidency, who had inaugurated these monetary and cost increasing policies. But the coup was not successful, and as a result, Chavez and his co-conspirators went to prison. In 1994, Chavez was released from prison, and he promised to continue the struggle to correct the problems in Venezuela through peaceful and political process. In 1998, Hugo Chavez ran for the presidency. He was elected with 56% of the vote. He promises to represent the poor, dissolve the National Congress, convene a constitutional assembly, and distribute the country's resources more equitably. There was a vast gulf between the rich and the poor, one of the most striking in all of the world, considering the huge oil reserves that Venezuela was tapping into and was providing so much income for the elite. But it wasn't getting down to the poor. In fact, statistics I've seen from that time indicate that there was a 55 or 60% poverty rate, even in a country where there was so much oil wealth. So this is how Chavez got elected, to have a revolution, to turn the government over to the people. In 1999, a new constitution was written and ratified, and a new Congress was elected under the changed constitution. Among the changes was that the name of Venezuela went from the Republic of Venezuela to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, harkening back to the days of Simón Bolívar, when people had a revolution against then the superpower of Spain. And so this is an allusion to the need for another revolution against the superpower of the world, now being the United States. The gender language in the Constitution was neutral. It raised women's rights. There was a ban on discrimination in the workplace, and homemakers were now covered by the Social Security system. The standard of human rights was elevated. There were statements in there: freedom from racial discrimination, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, access to health care, education. So it was a very progressive constitution, certainly for Latin America, and much as a model for the whole world. Articles 71 to 74 provide for public referenda, 4 types. There's a consultative, there's a recall, approving, and a rescinding. So these are elections that could in some way be guiding for the government, not just electing people to office, but to confirm, to consult, and perhaps recall politicians who were not living up to the wishes of the people. Environmental rights were guaranteed, biological diversity, genetic resources were protected. This is all in the Constitution of 1999. Ecological processes, national parks were all protected. It also prohibits the patenting of the genes of living beings who live in the wonderful biological diversity of Venezuela's rainforests and tropical environment. In 2000, Hugo Chavez is now re-elected under the terms of this constitution. He receives a 60% popular vote. Because of a right-wing reaction to these changes that people could see that were beginning to accelerate in Venezuela, the opposition organized a coup. Hugo Chavez was held for, I've seen different numbers. Some people have said 3 or is it 4 days that he was held in captivity. He was held for 3 days in captivity. Then the poor people from the barrios, from the neighborhoods where he has his deepest support, came out and literally broke down the doors of the place where he was staying had him on their shoulders and carried him out. So the coup was pushed aside by popular will.
What year was that?
Let's see, that is in 2002. That was in April of 2002. Now, in December of 2002, again, the opposition is mobilizing against Hugo Chavez, and there's a strike of the oil industry managers and high-tech clerical workers after Chavez appoints a new board of directors to the state oil company, PDVSA, or known as PDVSA. It's a state oil company, and up until that time, PDVSA had acted like a private corporation. Even though it was a state department, they had so much power and such a tradition of operating in isolation, if you will, from the rest of the country. Hugo Chavez reappointed the board of directors, and the people in mid and upper management went on strike. This pretty much shut down the Venezuelan economy for about 2 months while the strike was on. In February of 2003, so the strike happens in December of 2002. In February of 2003, Chavez fires 18,000 PDVSA employees on grounds of mismanagement and corruption. The Supreme Court upholds the charges against these workers, and the workers are not rehired. So then you've had a coup in 2002, then you had the strike at the end of 2002, beginning into 2003 in February. In 2004, the opposition collects so many hundreds of thousands of signatures on a recall referendum for the expulsion of President Chavez. This fails with 59% of the vote for Chavez to stay in power. So you've had a military coup, you've had a strike, and now you have the recall, all happening in a period of about 4 years. So this was how the opposition, we can't get you one way, we're going to get you another, and then another, and another. So in 2005, Chavez completely makes a break with the old order in declaring his conversion to what he calls 21st century socialism. And Natalie, I'm sure, will speak some of that in her presentation. In 2006, Chavez is re-elected to the presidency, this time with 63% of the popular vote. So he's gone from 56% to about 60%, now being re-elected 63%. In 2007, based on his re-election in 2006, in 2007, there's 69 amendments to the Constitution that are offered to the public for a vote. I won't go into all of those amendments. I hope you will cover some of that. Yeah. These amendments to the Constitution lost by a little over 50%. And just one of those amendments states the president may run again for re-election. And in this country, it was all about that one amendment, but there were many other amendments to the Constitution that also were put before the public. So with this very brief chronology of events, I turn the podium over to, Bill has some comments to make.
I want to introduce Natalie. Funny? Is that funny, Joey? Born and raised in Venezuela, she is currently the Associate Director of the Venezuela Information Office, an agency based in Washington, D.C., that seeks to present to the people of the U.S. an accurate view of the current political situation in Venezuela. Before joining the Information Office, Natalie was a political and media analyst for the Embassy of Venezuela in Washington. And prior to working on Venezuelan issues, Natalie was communications staff for the Service Employees International Union here, SEIU, and political analyst for the immigrant rights organization, CASA of Maryland. Natalie received a BA degree in political science and international intercultural studies from Groucho College in Maryland.
To you, Natalie.
I'm an activist, so I like to get feedback from people. So let me just start by asking a brief question, then I'll jump into the referendum where you left off. When I say Venezuela, tell me the first word that comes to your mind. Anybody?
Oil.
Hugo, oil, that's it. You know, I travel a lot across the US, so I went to a particular university that I'm not going to mention, down in the East Coast, no, actually the West Coast. And I asked that question. These were grad students, okay? And like the 3 girls that were on the road, she said, Miss Universe. I'm like, all right. Okay. Next question. But that's actually true. So oil, Hugo Chavez. I guess if you want to put it this way, since we have President Chavez in power, we are fashion right now. Everybody knows about Venezuela. When I came to this country in 1999, for the first time, when I said I was from Venezuela, people would say, Minnesota? I'm like, no, Venezuela. And then people would say, and where's that at? I'm like, well, it's not in Africa. People would say, is it in Africa or in Europe? I'm like, no, South America. That's kind of sad, you know, that people don't even know where it was. But now everybody knows it. So just jumping where you left off, you were talking about the referendum that happened in 2007, last year, December. Basically, in this referendum, it's kind of tough to get there before I give you a little bit more of a background, even though he did a great job giving you that outline. You need to really think that, and when I said before that we were fashion, that everybody knows about Venezuela, or there are 2 reasons why everybody knows about Venezuela. One, you already mentioned it, oil. You know, we had the 3rd largest reserve of crude oil in the world. We had the largest reserve in the entire Western Hemisphere, and that means a lot. That actually is key on what's happening to us right now. When I say us, I mean Venezuela. That's one thing. But the other thing that is equally important, but I would say actually in my personal view more important, is the ideology that we have in Venezuela and that is being led by President Chavez. And it's an ideology that speaks about Latin American union, about being able to actually cooperate within nations, among nations, to be stronger and not to depend on one thing or one other nation. So keep that in your mind while we're speaking, the 3 of us. Because that's actually the answer of all the things that all the points that we're actually, telling you. So we did have a referendum in 2007 to change or amend the Constitution. We had a new Constitution in 1999 when President Chavez took power. So let me give you this little background. So let me ask you something. Let's say you live in a state, or let's say you live in a country, and you are president of this country, right? You're just elected. And you know that your country has lots of problems. People are not educated, there's a lot of unemployment, a lot of poverty, even though you're rich in oil, 80% of people live under poverty. So you have that situation. What's the first thing that you would do? Let me answer. In the case of Venezuela, we decided that the first thing would be to see if you have a problem, you really want to know what are the roots of the problems. So the first thing that happened in Venezuela was to create communities across the nation. There were community councils. So people, and I'm talking about doctors, I'm talking about housewives, I'm talking about students, day laborers, etc., you name it. They all got together in their communities, and they started drafting what the best constitution for the country will be. Just imagine if you had that power. Then your president will tell you, just go to your neighborhood, get together, and tell me what do you want to see in your constitution. And your constitution, if you're religious, is like the Bible for the Catholics, like for example, So you see what it means. So we did that. So after we did that, so we found out that, for example, Venezuela we're very proud to have a strong indigenous communities in Venezuela who have always been neglected. And we actually have one of the oldest indigenous tribes in the world is in Venezuela, in the Amazon region. So we said, well, if we really want to help indigenous people, if we really want to empower the people, we need to have them to be represented in the National Assembly, which is like the Congress in the US. So in this new constitution, we demand to have at least 3 seats represented by indigenous communities. So we know exactly what they're going through and how we can help them. So that's just one example of many others. The other thing that we said is healthcare. Healthcare, it should not be a luxury. It should not be just for the rich. Healthcare is a human right. And because it's a human right, it has to be in the Constitution as something that the government is responsible of doing or giving to the people. So that's why it happened. So in the 1999 Constitution, remember, Chavez took power in 1998. So as soon as he took power, he created all these community councils and they drafted this new Constitution. So anyway, so the Constitution was drafted, we have all these things included, but it wasn't perfect. That was just the first step. So in 2007, after, all the things that Clark already mentioned, which I'm not going to go through again, but if you have any questions, please come up later, just to save time. There were other things that really needed to be amended in this new Constitution that we wanted to pass. So one of the things were, for example, in Venezuela or territory, we have 72 islands in Venezuela, island, like little islands. Our territories are not really defined, so it included in the airspace, so it has to be in the Constitution, it has to be clearly defined. So that was one of the really important things that this Constitution reform was on debate in December 2007. The other thing was working hours. We believe in Venezuela that, in order to have a good society, a respectful society, a strong society, people need to have quality of life. And having quality of life means being with your family, helping your children grow up. So we wanted to reduce the working hours from 40 to 36. So that was another point. So there were several. One of the most controversial points was the unlimited presidential terms, as Clark was referring. What it means basically that every 5 years, we're going to have elections, but the person who's president can run for election as he pleases, unlimited. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean that he's going to be president for life, as the president in the US and also Venezuela wanted to portray. That was not reality. What Venezuelans wanted is that if the guy is doing a good job and we want him to be back, he should be allowed to if we want him to be elected. And the other thing for you to keep in mind is that elections in Venezuela are the most observed around the world. And the government doesn't say this. The UN says it, the European Union, the Carter Center, the Organization of American States, they all monitor Venezuelan elections and they have concluded that it's the most observed and the most transparent. Why? Because we basically vote twice. We use the electronic machines, but at the same time the machine gives us a paper trail, which also gets counted. So they count it twice. Something that doesn't even happen in the US. And so we have all these mechanisms to do this. But anyway, so we lost in 2007 the referendum by only 1.5%. And there was also not a lot of people going to vote. That's the other thing. And I have to say, because I was in Venezuela during the elections, there was a lot of misinformation out there. Especially in Venezuela, what we have is a media war. I mean, if you go to Venezuela, and I guarantee you, if you've never been in Venezuela, you gotta see this. Turn on the TV or just get the first the first newspaper you see on the corner. When you open it, the headline would say something horrible about President Chavez, about the Chavez government. And also, it's also very, they use discriminatory and racial, language. Like when President Chavez came to power, they would call him monkey, that type of thing. Very, very, disgusting. But it's still happening. So to say that in Venezuela there is no freedom of expression is just a total lie. Whoever says that or believes that has never been in Venezuela. And because people really feel free to speak up. The other thing to point out, in case you have that question, if you heard, because it's all over the media that Venezuela doesn't have freedom of expression, tell me, when in Venezuela there's no signs or there's no people out on the street speaking up, then I'll be worried. Because I'm an internationalist, if you look in a country and if the country is silent, that should scare you. Because that means that people don't feel that they have the right to get on the street and speak up. That's not the case in Venezuela. When you turn on the TV, what do you see? You see people protesting. But you know what? They had the right to protest. And if I have friends who are not with Chavez, one of my best friends is totally anti-Chavista. But you know what? We respect each other. And I respect her because she has the liberty of speaking up and say what she feels. And I speak up and say what I feel. And that's the beauty of it. And that's what you see in Venezuela. So whoever tells me that Venezuela is not a democracy when we have that type of liberty is totally wrong. So that's something there also for you to think about. I'm throwing a lot of things in, and I'm just saying the things that are more up there in the US, so I can answer your questions. The other important things that I want to point out is about US-Venezuela relations. So also keep in mind that Venezuela has had a historic relation with the United States for decades. I mean, we share so many things, including, baseball. 78 people in the major leagues of baseball in the U.S. are from Venezuela. That's one thing. Also, oil, of course, energy. We have a lot of things in common. But sadly, it was until President Bush came into power that things started to change. And I shouldn't just say President Bush, but also the corporations. Tell you what, in 2002, as Clark was saying, we had a coup d'etat against President Chavez for 3 days in April 2002. What was the reason of the coup? You may ask. I can tell you that right before that, in Venezuela, when President Chavez took office, we started implementing lots of new changes. One of the changes was that, these big companies like ExxonMobil, VP, the big giant petroleum companies that were operating in Venezuela, they will only pay 1% as tax in Venezuela. 1%. Besides that, there were areas that were very ecologically, like, that needed protection, like in the Amazon or like the state of Zulia, and they were not protecting or abiding the law to make sure that they were not destroying they were not making a huge ecologically damage in the area. They were not doing any of that. So when Chavez took the power, he said, okay, well, first thing is that oil or petroleum is a natural resource. And Venezuela, as a country, as a sovereign nation, we had the right and the duty of making sure that the natural resource that we have is being held or is being controlled by Venezuela, not by foreign interests or foreign companies. It cannot happen like that anymore. Not even Mexico was going through that, So that was one thing. So all these changes started taking place. And of course, the big companies like ExxonMobil, who's very extremely linked with Dick Cheney and George Bush, then they started acting and doing their thing. So that's one reason why we had this coup. The other thing is that it wasn't just the oil companies that were being nationalized. They are now what's called mixed companies, meaning that they can operate in Venezuela, but always under the supervision of the Venezuelan government, under PDVSA, which is a petroleum company. So it's a very complicated issue that I can talk to you on the side further about it, because I don't want to spend too much time about that here. But that wasn't the only thing that got nationalized. The other big thing was CanTV. CanTV is a telephone company in Venezuela. As Dr. mentioned when he read my bio, I used to work for SCIU, a union here in the US. And when I say this is why I'm mentioning this. CanTV, the telephone company in Venezuela, was owned, 30% of CanTV was owned by Verizon, the telephone company based in New York. So when we changed the constitution and we decided to increase the minimum wage, by the way, the minimum wage in Venezuela is the highest in Latin America. So you know that. When we did that, it meant that every single worker, including those who were retired and was getting pension, were also allowed their pension to be increased. Well, CanTV under Verizon didn't want to do that. They just said, no, we're not going to do it. So they wanted to break the law. So all the workers, especially the retired people from CanTV, they got on the streets demanding the government to take over CanTV and say, these people, they don't want to pay us as much as the law requests. You got to do something about it. That was one thing. So since that happened, the other thing is that CanTV wasn't providing telephone service in rural areas in the country. And that's an issue, because if you're really a responsible company and you're in charge of all the telecommunications in the nation, you need to make sure that poor people also have access to telecommunications, that they also have telephones. So anyway, to make a long story short, then Venezuela decided to buy all those shares from Verizon, this private corporation, and make it a national company, and now it's one of the best. So all these little things were happening throughout the nation. So we're nationalizing also. So the media says that we're actually expropriating, that we're taking away companies, the government is taking away companies, but that's not true, because we're paying them. We're going to actually trial to make sure that people are compensated right. That's the reality. So those are just quick examples of what's happening in Venezuela right now, which is it's a lot. So going back to U.S.-Venezuela relations, so we started having headaches with the Bush administration since Mr. Bush got into power, because of the things I just mentioned before, the fact that ExxonMobil doesn't have as much power as they had before in Venezuela, the fact that we're saying that Venezuela, you gotta respect Venezuela in Latin America, we're not your backyard. It's not you can come here, take our resources, and then take off. So we're starting implementing that, and now people in Latin America are electing leaders that actually believe that too. We have Bolivia, we have Ecuador, we have Argentina, we have Chile sometimes, we have Brazil, we have Guatemala, we have Uruguay, Paraguay, Nicaragua, and hopefully, in next year we're gonna have El Salvador too, with Funes in power. So we're multiplying, but even though this is happening in Latin America, Washington does not get it. I mean, we go this way and they go that way, and it's just crazy. And it really, for us who work in this field, it makes no sense that people in Washington, they don't care, they don't want to know, or they're just so, their minds is so closed that there is no way you can sneak in and just tell them to see things in another way. So that's the situation there. I don't want to take too much time. Then we have, and then people, and I'm going to mention this on the side too, President Chavez. People say, and I do a lot of work with the press, and they tell me, but it's just your president, and not just the press, but regular people. Your president, he likes to insult people. The other day he called Bush a donkey, and the other day he did this and he did that, and he has no diplomacy. And then I said, first of all, he actually says this. He's not a diplomat. He's a guy who came from the countryside. Second of all, it takes a person like that, with that charisma, with that passion, because that's what it is, to do what he has done. Because nobody else would have ever done it, and to take all this tension and being attacked all the time. Why don't you tell me about Condoleezza Rice, how many times she has insulted my president, or President Bush, or Dick Cheney? Nobody wants to talk about that, but they talk the other side. It's true, sometimes he goes beyond. I mean, every time I see Aló Presidente, which is a weekly show of President Chavez on Sundays, which you can watch online, the next day I'm like, I have a headache. Because all the press is calling me about something that he said. And the other thing is that it's very interesting that, we Latinos speak Spanish, but we have different dialects. So sometimes you say something in Spanish in Venezuela, but in Puerto Rico will mean something totally different. So sometimes the reporter, you see the translation, and it makes no sense. And we just see a translation in the Washington Post, which is totally different from the New York Times. And but I do believe it's not intentional. It's just people that just don't know. So, but it's very, very important. It's very crucial that they have to be educated, because legislation and the perception of the public relies on them in that respect. So they take things out of context without even knowing, just because they didn't understand the translation. But anyway, so that was something that I had to say over there. People always ask me that. But the point is that, President Chavez, yes, he's when he speaks like really loudly. But at the same time, I wouldn't change him for anybody else. just because we need somebody like him. You know, and I don't say this because I get paid by the Venezuelan government, you know, I just want to put this on the side. I say this as a Venezuelan who really feels and believes with what I'm doing and what Venezuela is doing. And not just for Venezuela, but for the rest of Latin America, for example. You know, those agreements that we have with the Caribbean nations on oil, to keep them discounting oil, is really important. We give more food to Haiti than the United States have ever done. We do in Venezuela. You know, even though the United States has been the one, you know, messing with Haiti's democracy and trying to overthrow them. And so it's about that, and it's also about recognizing who we are, which is something new in Latin America. You see, in Venezuela, we're proud of being black, of being indigenous, because, you know, I have black hair, but it didn't come just because. It come because my family has my background is African, even though now I don't look like that because I'm mixed. I'm Arab too. So, you know, but it's about teaching that to other Latin American nations. And so when I speak to other Latinos, they get really amazed and they start thinking about it. Because in the past, they only, you know, they would be always amazed about learning about the US and Europe. But now it shouldn't be that anymore. They need also to learn about Africa and about other countries. And that's the ideology that Venezuela brings to the table that Washington is so scared of. You know, us waking up. You know, and I'm not saying Venezuela is perfect because there's a lot of room for improvement. I'm telling you, there's a lot of bureaucracy going on at an administrative level. But, you know, that's not going to change from one day to the next. I'm conscious that my generation will not see the big change. Probably my children, if I ever have one. You know, I'm just conscious about it because those changes are cultural. They're not happening from one day to the next. So also keeping that in mind. Because I get a lot of people telling me, yo, I want to go to Venezuela, I want to live there, I want to work there. And then they go there and they think that there's no poverty and that everything is perfect. No. You know, you can't expect that within 10 years, all the things that happen within 50 are going to be eliminated. It's impossible. But it's about educating the youth and also bringing them here. For example, one really critique that I have that is very... it's not, don't take it wrong. But I think in this type of gatherings that we have, and I'm very thankful for inviting me here, I think, especially older folks, which I think is the majority here, and I say this with all due respect, I think everybody has the responsibility of bringing at least one or two young people with them. Because, you know, if you don't want to educate the youth, if the youth doesn't come here and listen to me or somebody else, you know, they're not going to learn and they're not going to spread the word. And it's just that important. And I think people here in the US, they still don't get it. Look, Venezuela, this is a new movement. You mentioned the 21st century socialism. This is our idea, but we don't know what that is. If you ask me, Natalie, what's 21st century socialism? I will give you my personal answer, but it's not written in a book. It's personal. Not even President Chavez has it in a book. Nobody has it, because this is a new attempt. We're little babies in this. You know, we're taking the first step. We can't even walk by ourselves yet. It's impossible. So my opinion on what's the 21st century socialism would be thinking that everything that you do has an impact, even if it's direct or indirect. And whatever you do, whatever policy that you make, it shouldn't be based on money. It should be based on people. What's the best for the people? That's what socialism is. You see, I'm a socialist. I'm not a US socialist. I'm a Venezuelan socialist. I do not relate with people who are socialists in the United States. I just do not do it. Some people may get offended with that. But I just don't, because I believe in things that probably people in the US who are socialists don't believe in. You see, we have a new idea, a new dimension, and that's what we're trying to teach, and that's why Washington is so scared of us. So the last thing I want to mention, so I don't take too much time, is that, is it okay? Okay. Oh, okay, good. The other thing I want to mention is that, by the way, today, President Chavez and Bolivia, and also presidents of Bolivia, Brazil, and other nations, they just signed an agreement this morning called UNASUR, which is South American Nations United, and it's an agreement to provide low-cost energy and also to strengthen our food networks, to make sure that we have food supplies, and other things that just happened today. So we have several agreements going on throughout Latin America that is making us stronger and stronger, and that's just Washington. The other thing that we had for now, 2 years now, it's Telesur. And with that, I'm going to start on the topic on the media. Telesur is a network in Latin America. It's like saying CNN in Spanish, but it's like CNN, but with the other ideology, lefties, not right-wings. So it's great because we have news now coming from all these different nations throughout Latin America, and it's under the perspective of the people. So for the first time ever, you're going to see a Latino indigenous being the anchor of a TV show, or like a black guy being the one interviewing people. I mean, in Venezuela, when Latin America were very famous with our soap operas, the novelas, soap operas, you know what I'm talking about? You will never see a black person or dark-skinned person, indigenous person being like in the main role of those TV shows. It's always the blonde ones, you know, the white ones. And that's, you know, racial discrimination. So now with Telesur, we're seeing all these colorful images of Latinos in this TV network, and it shocks people. And we also have a Telesur correspondent in Washington, D.C. that covers these United States issues to be transmitted across Latin America. So the issue with Telesur, the idea is that, you know, we have a war with the media, with the mainstream media. We can do a lot of stuff, but if people don't listen to it or people don't know about it, it's a little thing, you know, you're not giving a huge impact. You're not doing a huge impact to society. So we decided to create our own TV channel. So that's what's happening. So I jump into that because with the media, the way the mainstream media portrays Venezuela and other things that are happening in Latin America is definitely not accurate. For example, I can tell you I was watching CNN last December in 2007 for the referendum, and I was watching CNN in Espanol, CNN in Spanish. And then I was watching that they were showing a march taking place, and they were saying that it was happening in Venezuela. But I see that the people in the march were wearing big hats and long boots, right? And I say, wait a second, we don't wear huge hats in Venezuela. We don't wear boots in Venezuela unless you go to Los Llanos, to like the southern region, but TVs don't go there. I mean, there's no way that could be Venezuela. And they were saying, yeah, there's big protests happening in Venezuela against President Chavez. And I said, wait a second, so I called my ambassador. And Mr. Ambassador, can you turn on your TV? You gotta watch this. So he watches the thing and he's like, do you think those images are kind of weird? I'm like, yeah, because I don't think they're in Venezuela, I said. And then he called Venezuela, blah, 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 they did all this big thing. And at the end, they found out that footage that CNN in Espanol was presenting as in Venezuela happened 4 years ago in Mexico. You know what I mean? And they were saying that it happened in Venezuela. So it's just a lie right there. So we demanded CNN we wanted to sue them. So they apologized and they said that they didn't notice. It wasn't intentional, and this is the type of thing that happens all the time. And people don't even know, people are not aware of this. The other thing is the Washington Post. I've been trying to have an op-ed in the Washington Post with, not me, somebody else on our side, on our view, for the past 4 years. And Jackson Gill, who's the editor, the chief editor for the Washington Post, wouldn't print it. He has only printed one op-ed on our view, and that was the one signed by the ambassador right after the coup. But that's it. So it's just, they don't give us the space to portray our views. And that's something so people here in the US says that we have freedom of expression, freedom of the press. That's a lie. That's not true. Because if we had real freedom here, you will be able to say what you say and be able to print your opinions, your blueprints in a newspaper, in a major newspaper. And it's just not true. CNN, the same thing. In order to be interviewed with CNN, something horrible has to occur, and that they will give you the space. Or the opposite. For example, I've been in Fox News once. And I really had to think about it to say yes to them, because they were just bugging us to do it. And that was the day President Chavez went to the UN 2 years ago to say, it smells like sulfur here. He was referring to President Bush, and then he called him a donkey and, alcoholic and all that great stuff. So I was there when that happened. So they were desperate getting it. So that was the entire show for Fox News. That was the entire show on that piece. President Chavez, was the hottest thing of the day. So they had to. So I said, well, since they were saying so many horrible things, I said, fuck it, let me go. So I went to Fox, and for like 30 minutes, and there were like 5 people against me. So I was the first thing. I was like, you're talking, and I said it on the air, you're talking about fairness here, and you have 5 people, at least 50 year, they were like, the youngest person in that group was like probably 50, and I'm like, back then I was 25. It's like, okay, I don't care about the age, I can take you all, no problem. So I did it, but I got so many emails and phone calls of people like you, telling me, thank you. Thank you for taking out, all the we were tired of seeing all these people. And when I, was flipping channels and then I saw you and I heard Chavez and I decided to stay there. I mean, people gave me all these great comments. So it helped. So sometimes a lot of people tell me, well, Natalie, it's not worth it to go to Fox. It's not worth it to go to CNN. It's not worth it to this. Okay, can you stop being so negative and tell me something positive? Just give it a shot. At least once. Because I guarantee you're going to touch somebody who's going to be impressed. And then that person is going to be doing the same thing they're doing in their local press. And that's just what happened. So my message here, and it's not just to be applied on Venezuela. It must be applied in every single issue you're being here. Even the issue with Iraq, the issue with, domestic violence, you name it. Every single issue. People need to speak up, and at least start in the local news, the local papers. Because otherwise nobody's gonna know, and that's just the biggest word we have is that one, the media. I mean, this government controls the press. Everybody knows it. The Pentagon controls the press here. Everybody knows it. But that should not be a reason for you not to do anything about it. So that's the thing that I wanted to say. And I have a whole bunch of materials in the back of that table, different issues. I mean, Venezuela is an oil country. But you would never think that we actually have a green agenda. But we do. And I don't want to get into those details, but if you go there, you find fact sheets on the mission to end poverty, where we talk about the different missions that we have, missions or programs in Venezuela. For example, education. If you want to empower the poor, you need to give them education and healthcare. Otherwise, you're not doing anything. You need to make people feel that they're humans and that they can actually take over the world if they want to, if they feel passionate about it. So we have also things on the economy. We have fact sheets on ALBA, which is ALBA is basically the idea that we have against the free trade agreement. So it's the opposite. It's over there. In fact, it's on all things. We also have a sign up, and if you want to get 1 email per week on analysis of the media here in the US and Venezuela, just sign up. You get 1 email every Friday on Venezuela and what the press is saying that is wrong and how we can back up our opinion. And also, if you want to know what's happening in Congress, the other thing is that Congress is trying to put Venezuela in the state of terrorist groups. They want to name Venezuela as a terrorist nation, and something very, very complicated there. And but I don't think, hopefully it will not pass. I think it will be a huge mistake, especially knowing that we're the second, we talk about the economy, Venezuela is the second trading partner of the United States. Second in Latin America. We're the 12th around the world. So there's a lot of economic issues there. But the point in fact is that we're not terrorists, and I think Dr. Blanc is gonna follow up on that and speak more about that, so I don't want to touch that. And so that's basically all the details I wanted to say, and I'll leave for you to follow up. Thank you.